From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. First, the headlines. Biontech working on potential new vaccine against Omicron variant. Pentagon to probe 2019 airstrike that killed civilians in Syria. Republicans slam new Twitter CEO for 2010 tweet defending Muslims. 74 years later, Palestinians remain stateless. Muslim world silent over treatment of Uyghurs. Indian man builds Taj Mahal replica for his wife. And our top story tonight, Biontech confirmed on Monday that it has started work on a potential new vaccine against the Omicron variant of the coronavirus. A company spokesperson told Anadolu agency that they're investigating the new variant to understand whether it escapes the existing vaccines and simultaneously working on a potential new version of their COVID-19 vaccine. The first steps of developing a new vaccine overlap with the research necessary in order to evaluate whether a new shot will be needed, Jasmina Atatovich said in an email statement, adding that this work already started last Thursday. She said this has been a standard procedure after the emergence of such variants, as they are a race against time. The Omicron variant, which was first detected in southern Africa, is classified as a variant of concern by the World Health Organization. Scientists detected more than 30 mutations on the spike protein. It's not yet clear whether Omicron is more transmissible, causing more severe disease, or more resistant to the current jabs. Preliminary results from the current studies are expected to come out in 2 weeks. Biontech, which was founded by Turkish immigrants to Germany and its U.S. partner Pfizer, said last week that they will be able to distribute and produce a new version of their COVID-19 vaccine within nearly 100 days. That is, if medical studies conclude that the current jabs are less effective against this new variant. China's President Xi Jinping pledged to offer Africa 1 billion COVID vaccine doses on Monday. The continent is struggling to acquire enough shots to immunize its population against the virus. Xi Jinping said his country would donate 600 million doses directly in a speech made via video link to a China-Africa summit near Senegal's capital, Dakar. Another 400 million doses would come from other sources, such as investments in production sites, which are lacking across much of Africa. The forum between China and African states emphasized trade and security amongst other issues. It was held in the city of Diamaniadio, near Senegal's seaside capital. The U.S. Defense Department will investigate a 2019 airstrike in the Syrian town of Baghuz that killed dozens of civilians, spokesman John Kirby said on Monday. Speaking at a Pentagon press briefing, Kirby said Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has ordered a full review of the March 18th airstrike. A U.S. fighter jet killed 70 civilians, including women and children, that day. The investigation will be conducted by General Michael Garrett, the commander of U.S. Army Forces Command. The inquiry will assess the number of casualties, compliance with the law of war, record-keeping and reporting procedures, and whether accountability measures would be appropriate. The New York Times reported the airstrike came without warning during the last days of the fight against Daesh in eastern Syria. Kirby said Garrett will have 90 days to complete the inquiry.
The Secretary has directed today a review of the civilian casualty incident that occurred on March 18th, 2019 in Baghuz, Syria. This review will be conducted by General Michael Garrett, the commander of U.S. Army Forces Command. He will review the reports of investigation already conducted into that incident and will conduct further inquiry into the facts and circumstances related to it. He will have 90 days to complete this inquiry.
Former Defense Secretary Mark Esper on Sunday sued the agency he once led, accusing Pentagon officials of improperly blocking significant portions of his upcoming memoir. Esper wrote about his tumultuous tenure under former President Donald Trump. He sued the agency in federal district court in Washington, D.C., saying portions of the book were being concealed under the guise of classification. Trump fired Esper shortly after losing his re-election bid last November. Esper said the book, titled A Sacred Oath, aims to give the public a full and unvarnished accounting of our nation's history, especially the more difficult periods. It's expected to be published in May. Hours after Parag Agrawal was named Twitter's CEO, Republicans attacked him for an 11-year-old tweet in which he quoted comedian Asif Mandvi, mocking racism and Islamophobia. Agrawal shared a quote from The Daily Show in 2010, lampooning anti-Muslim bigotry. Twitter co-founder Jack Dorsey announced Monday he was stepping down as the company's CEO and that Agrawal, its chief technology officer, would replace him. The right-wing website Boebert on Monday posted Agrawal's October 2010 tweet. It asserted Agrawal had uncritically repeated a quote in 2010 suggesting that there should be no need to distinguish between white people and racists. Days after Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert was harshly criticized for making anti-Muslim comments about Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, the two spoke by phone Monday. Boebert had likened the Minnesota Democrat to a bomb-carrying terrorist. The lawmaker said Monday's conversation did not go well. Boebert issued a rapid statement last Friday about her earlier comments and sought to extend an olive branch. But the call ended abruptly after Boebert rejected Omar's request for a public apology. Boebert previously apologized to anyone in the Muslim community I offended, but not directly to Omar, who is Muslim. Meanwhile, the Denver Post published an editorial with the headline, "Since Boebert seems incapable, we'll apologize to Omar for her." Palestinians' dreams of having an independent state remains unrealized as they mark the 74th anniversary of their homeland's partition by the United Nations. On November 29, 1947, the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution 181. It called for the partition of mandatory Palestine into 3 territories, including Jewish and Arab states, following the expiry of Britain's Palestine Mandate. Although Jews at the time formed 33% of the total population, the resolution gave them a state on 56% of the total area of historical Palestine. Arabs, who owned a majority of the land with 67% of the population, were designated only 43.5% of the land. Pro-Palestinian demonstrators protested in the Moroccan capital Rabat against the country renewing ties with Israel on the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. The North African nation renewed official relations with Israel last December. The move came 2 decades after Morocco cut ties with Israel after the Second Palestinian Intifada, or uprising. A string of normalization deals have been struck between Israel and Arab countries, brokered by the administration of former U.S. President Donald Trump. Morocco's king heads the Organization of Islamic Corporations Al-Quds Committee, which is charged with protecting Muslim holy sites in Jerusalem. He warned against any attempt to change the city's judicial, historical, and demographic status. In July 2019, a group of mostly European countries signed a letter to the UN Human Rights Chief condemning China's actions against Uyghurs in what is known as Xinjiang, East Turkestan. No Muslim-majority country were amongst the signatories. Yet over 36 states, including Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, signed their letters praising China's achievements in human rights and counter-terrorism efforts in East Turkestan. While several Muslim states defended the genocide, Turkey, Indonesia, Malaysia were the rare exceptions. The Washington Post editorialized about the letter from 37 Muslim nations. The Post noted that the letter represents a shameful capitulation by majority Muslim states that often pose as defenders of the faith, particularly when it comes to condemning Israel. Observer columnist Nick Cohen wrote in The Guardian criticizing Muslims for their silence over China's treatment of Uyghurs when they have expressed outrage in other situations. He said they use the idea of Muslim solidarity only when it suits them. Argentina's justice system will investigate allegations of war crimes committed by Burma's military against the country's Rohingya minority under a court ruling. The case was brought under the legal premise of universal justice. The UN says a 2017 army crackdown on Rohingya Muslims in Burma could amount to genocide. It triggered an exodus of more than 740,000 members of the Rohingya community, mainly to Bangladesh. Argentina's courts have taken up other universal jurisdiction cases in the past. This includes ex-dictator Francisco Franco's rule in Spain and the Falun Gong movement in China. The International Criminal Court and the UN's International Court of Justice already have proceedings against Burma and its leaders for war crimes. Speaking for the Burma Task Force, Adam Carroll commended Argentina for working to hold war criminals accountable anywhere around the world. Turkey early Tuesday rescued 65 asylum seekers who were illegally pushed back by Greece into Turkish waters on the Aegean Sea. Some 30 asylum seekers who were in a rubber boat were taken ashore near Çeşme, district of Izmir province, the Turkish Coast Guard command said. 35 refugees were also rescued from a rubber boat off the province's Menderes district. All of the occupants were later taken to the provincial migration office. Turkey has been a key transit point for asylum seekers crossing into Europe. Saudi Arabia on Monday called on the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or OIC, to convene an extraordinary ministerial meeting to discuss the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. The kingdom's official news agency warned that as winter approaches, millions of Afghans will need help getting adequate food, medicine, and housing. It said, should Afghanistan face economic collapse in the wake of the Taliban regaining power this summer, it would damage regional and international peace and stability. Bangladeshi doctors treating ailing opposition leader and ex-premier Khaleda Zia said Sunday they feared for her life. They're calling on the government to allow her to fly abroad for medical care. The 76-year-old arch-rival of current Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has been diagnosed with liver cirrhosis. Her doctor said she suffered 3 massive internal bleedings in the past 2 weeks. And they don't have the means and supportive technology to control and stop her from bleeding again, Chief Doctor Fakhruddin Mohammad Siddiqui said. He said there is a higher risk of Zia's death without a sophisticated medical procedure. That is available only in developed countries like the United States, Britain, and Germany. A love-struck Indian man has emulated the world's most famous display of marital devotion by building a replica of the Taj Mahal for his wife. The original monument for true love was erected on the order of heartbroken 17th century Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan to house the tomb of his beloved wife Mumtaz. Anand Prakash Choksi's beloved, however, is very much alive. Choksi's wife also helped consult on the project and his version of the marble wonder of the world. It is about 1/3 the size of the original. The 52-year-old businessman told AFP his wife's only demand was to incorporate a meditation room because she's a spiritual woman. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment with Dr. Falk, the former UN Special Rapporteur on Palestinian territories. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me, just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school. Because this may be the last time I'll have lunch. Till September.
I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs,
and that's still not enough to put food on the table.
I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. We have with us Professor Richard Falk, Professor Emeritus of International Law at Princeton University and former United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Falk.
It's my pleasure.
So, Dr. Falk, the Palestinian dream of having an independent state remains unrealized as they mark the 74th anniversary of their homeland's partition by the United Nations. What are your thoughts on this occasion?
Well, my primary thought is the tragedy that has been imposed on the Palestinian people over this long period of time, where they have suffered a very harsh and oppressive regime of control that has denied them the realization of their most basic rights, and above all, the right of self-determination. And going back even further than the partition resolution of 1947, the Zionist project committed an initial wrong when it embarked on establishing an exclusive Jewish state in a non-Jewish society. And it did this by immigration and by geopolitics and subsidizing the movement of Jews from around the world to Palestine. This was a classic example of settler colonialism at the very time historically when colonialism was discredited and collapsing around the world. This in turn required Israel as a state concerned with its security to deal with resistance that was part of the national identity of the Palestinian people. And they had a right of resistance, especially to a colonial encroachment on their territory. And the Israeli reaction to that was to establish not only a discriminatory and dominating structure of control, but one that was racist in its essential character, having a Jewish elite control a non-Jewish population. And this is what's led people around the world to increasingly view Palestinian subjugation as one of an apartheid structure that resembles what was eventually dismantled in South Africa after a long struggle there.
In 2017, you actually co-authored with Professor Virginia Tilley the report and said that Israel had established an apartheid regime that dominates the Palestinian people as a whole. And this was the first time a report from a UN body made that conclusion. Now, in this past year or so, two other organizations, Human Rights Watch and Bet Shalom, have also called Israel a apartheid state. Have you read those reports, and what do you think of those reports?
Well, I think that there's been an amazing shift in the understanding of the Palestinian victimization and the Israeli mode of rule. Our study in 2017 was, as you say, the first serious academic study that tried to examine the evidence and the law that pertained to this allegation of apartheid. Previously, apartheid had entered somewhat the pro-Palestinian movement, but at its fringes and more radical elements. What has happened in the last 5 years, initially a consequence of our report that was attacked at the UN by the United States and Israel, was these two other reports, one by an Israeli NGO and the other by a mainstream American NGO that was somewhat identified with liberal Zionism. These, the effect has been to make the understanding of the apartheid nature of the Israeli state a matter of mainstream understanding. The rhetoric has changed, and one should further grasp the significance of the fact that apartheid is a crime against humanity in the Rome Statute that governs the International Criminal Court. So this is a major development in what I call the legitimacy war that is often decisive in these struggles for self-determination. It's not what happens on the battlefield that has won the anti-colonial wars of the prior century. It is really what happens in this symbolic domain of legitimacy. And there the UN plays an important role. And I think the kind of civil society studies that you referred to reinforce that role and give the Palestinians a solid foundation for their struggle and to address the grievances. And it's been a failure of the international community that it has been unable to produce a solution that was sustainable and gave was sustainable and implemented the basic rights of the Palestinian people.
Now, yesterday, Mohammed al-Kurdi, the young Palestinian activist, he gave a speech at the United Nations. He asked, how long will we offer Israel impunity? And he believes that one day this the settler colonial project that Israel has imposed on the Palestinians will come to an end, and this occupation will come to an end. But he asks, when will the United States be on the right side of history?
That's a very important but almost impossible question to answer, because it depends on how the play of forces within the United States address this moral and legal challenge. We do see some glimmers of hope in the sense that Congress has some few members now that are willing to take a somewhat balanced position, and the idea of a bipartisan consensus that has no dissent is something that has been put aside. Also, the Biden presidency, while following the basic pro-Israeli line, has not done so in such a defiant and irresponsible way that was true of the Trump presidency, which lasted between 2017 and 2021.
So what is next for the Palestinians? Are there, as an expert in international law, I'd really like for you to comment. What do you see? What courts can they use? What else is in store for them?
Well, you first have to understand that international law by itself cannot solve this problem, because the geopolitical resistance to implementing international law in this case is so powerful that it has up to this point nullified what should have been long ago done. And so I've often pointed out that the primacy of geopolitics prevents, in contexts of this sort, the implementation of international law. At the same time, international law can mobilize public opinion and civil society activism in ways that can affect the geopolitical pressure. And that happened in relation to South Africa, which no one thought would voluntarily or without violence, without substantial violence, make a transition to a multiracial constitutional democracy. So my view is that one should use the avenues of international law that are available. One of the main ones is the International Criminal Court, which has shown some willingness to investigate alleged crimes of Israel in the course of its occupation since 2014 at least. And there's every reason to think that a responsible International Criminal Court prosecutor would investigate the allegations of apartheid that now have received such substantial support in international society. There's also the possibility in some countries of using national courts, what is called universal jurisdiction, to impose criminal accountability on Israeli officials that are present within their territorial domain. That's probably not a very important procedure in this context, because Israelis have stayed away from countries that have such universal jurisdiction procedures available. So my end point is to say that international law is important in the legitimacy war context, but it cannot challenge a commitment that has geopolitical capabilities without very strong popular mobilization in civil society transnationally. That's what happened in relation to South African apartheid, and that brought an end to that system of racial domination, which no one expected, and which came about because the pressure mobilized was sufficient to change the outlook of the white supremacist leadership that had imposed apartheid on the Black majority population in South Africa. We have to recognize that international institutions have failed to find a solution over this 74-year period. They've been given more than an opportunity, but they have succumbed to the primacy of geopolitics, to the exercise of the veto in the Security Council, and to the defiant attitude taken by Israel toward international legal obligations. So now the responsibility and the opportunity is largely in the hands of civil society activism. And it is there that I believe hope lies for a just and sustainable peace that will benefit both peoples eventually.
Thank you so much for your insight and your time. A big responsibility on the shoulders of activists and Palestinian diaspora all over the world to keep this this apartheid, keep this occupation centered. So thank you so much for your time.
It's not just Palestinians who have an interest. This is a question that challenges all human beings. And it's a human interest to see that this evil system of apartheid is no longer operative in relation to the Palestinian people. All of us are responsible, including Jews such as myself.
Closing, take one. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube and Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.